Well, appreciate you having me. Bryan Blair, Vice President and Director of Athletics, University of Toledo. I started my career as born and raised South Carolina. Got a chance to play four sports in high school, and then I got a chance to play football at Wofford College. Wofford, being a Division One athlete, changed my life, and so I always latched onto that. And I went to law school. Candidly, it was a little bit of a stall tag. I was a history major, didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew law school would give me options. Got to law school, discovered I could combine my love of sports, my legal education, and just my general interest in entrepreneurship, and the business aspects of the industry. And so, been on that journey ever since. I worked at the NCAA national headquarters as a postgraduate intern, then worked at Rice University for about 2 years, University of South Carolina for about 2 years. That's also where I interned when I was in law school, and then came back to Rice in an elevated capacity as senior associate AD. And then got a chance to go out to Washington State, be deputy AD. Worked with Mike Leach. Pat Chun actually hired me. Had tremendous experience there for about 4 years, and then got the opportunity to come to here at the University of Toledo as a MAC institution, and been here about 2 years and rocking and rolling ever since. I think it's probably one of the most daunting tasks when you're young in the industry. I think when you first enter, people talk about networking. You've got these thoughts in your head. Okay, I go to a conference, shake some hands, get some business cards, and that's going to help me get to the job I want. And I think what you find out over time is certainly that's some people's perception of it. To me, I like to use the term network for knowledge. And what I mean by that is less of running up to a speaker at the end of a conference and trying to grab a business card and hoping they can help you get a job. That very rarely, if not never, ever works. Because one, they're being approached by hundreds of people at that time. Two, the chance of them having a meaningful relationship or exchange with you to build off of is just really, really hard in that context. I think you're best served by as you go to conferences, as you go to events, as you reach out to people, and sometimes just blind email or phone call to try to arrange coffee or meeting works. But set those up and ask questions that make you better at your trade. If you're in marketing, find ways to be better at marketing. If you're in compliance, find ways to be better at compliance. If you want career advice, ask those questions, but ask them to get more knowledge and be better at what you're trying to do, not ask them for a job in the first conversation. That just again never works. And I think there's a lot of young people that think, okay, I met this person at a conversation. Hey, can you help me get this job here? Do you know this person? That's not how that works. And people aren't going to put their reputation on the line for somebody they first met. But what you can do is ask really good questions that show curiosity, that penetrate, that really dig deep into the topic at hand that you're trying to get better. A byproduct of that is your showcasing your interest, your curiosity, your conversational skills, those kind of things, to try to learn. Okay, that person can learn more about you in that context than they would otherwise. So I think by meeting individuals, asking the right questions, you can really spur that growth. But also, you're going to be better wherever you're at. If you're an intern, if you're a GA, if you're entry level, that's going to make you better for your organization. That's going to help you elevate your career much faster than just trying to shake a hand and get a business card or otherwise. And I think conferences like the National Sports Forum are certainly helpful. But I would implore you all just to reach out to the people around you. I think one of the things I didn't do a good enough job early on when I was at the University of South Carolina, they allowed me to intern in their office, and it's kind of more or less in a back closet with the microwave and a fridge and a printer. And I just went to work every day and I tried to bust my tail and get work done, and I thought that would speak for itself. And I think certainly it did. But what I didn't do is I had 150 people in the athletic department that I probably should have been reaching out to start to understand what they do in other aspects. So I started my career at the law school in their compliance office, but I should have been reaching out to their marketing office and saying, hey, can we sit down for 15 minutes and just let me pick your brain about what you do to try to understand how a department functions and how it works, but also build relationship with people outside of my separate silo. So honestly, when I came back to South Carolina to work, I did just that. And I'd get the deputy AD and we'd sit down and talk. I'd get the head of academics and we sit down and talk. I'd take the head of marketing, who's a dear friend to this day, and ask him what's he doing with data. How is he getting our fan base to be what it is? How's he getting all those people excited? And ultimately, those relationships paved the way for him in a lot of ways, but it also rounded out my knowledge and skill set outside of the individual area I was working in, so I could understand the broader context of an athletic department and then try to find a way where I fit both currently, but also where I want it to be in the future, and maybe switch styles or switch jobs, or just gaining knowledge that as you escalate through the organization and you oversee more, you're prepared to have the skill set to properly lead those different areas. So again, network for knowledge. Don't be afraid. You don't have to go to a conference to meet people. People are sitting at their desk every day. And I think, especially when you're younger in your career, reaching out to individuals and saying, hey, I want to pick your brain for 10 to 15 minutes. And the glory of everything that happened after the pandemic, we're all accustomed to Zoom right now. And so this tool, you don't have to meet up at a restaurant and take 2 hours out of your day to meet with somebody. You've got the opportunity to send that message, that email, whatever, set up a quick Zoom to start the relationship, and then find ways to continue the relationship. And it may be, hey, you saw something in the news that such and such organization did well. Hey, shoot them a note after you met with them. Say, hey, John, Sally, whatever it may be. Just hey, saw this note about the 49ers doing this thing really cool in terms of economic impact. I'd love to learn more about it at a future date, and just keep the conversation alive. But you got to put work into it. It's like dating. You don't just get to go on a first date and get married. You got to continue to fuel that relationship. You got to continue to build trust. You got to continue to build an affinity, and try to make it so it's not a one-sided equation, so they feel like they're getting something out of the relationship as well.
So one of the things that I mentioned was you were a deputy AD at Wazoo. How has that helped you as an AD, knowing that you weren't in charge? So Pat, great guy, is Wazoo now at UW, but not being in charge yourself, how's that helped you now that you are in charge?
Yeah, well, I think if so, I knew I wanted to be an AD, so I would always approach those decisions as if I was, without having the consequences of being. And I think that's a very freeing experience because you almost, to a certain degree, almost like a role play, right? You get to act like or think like, hey, if I was them, this is what I would do, kind of conversation. And I think that can be really helpful to say, okay, if I was Pat, I would do this way. And I would make that recommendation to him. And sometimes he would say, okay. Sometimes he would tweak it. Other times he'd say, hey, that's stupid. Let's do this. But then I get to watch the outcome play out. And now he's wearing the responsibility for it. But I get to say, hey, I would have done this. Had I done this, Pat did this. This is how it played out. Here's the good. Here's the bad. Learn from those experiences while not being squarely in the crosshairs of the actual decision. Because once you get in this chair, one, it's really lonely. Two, the pressure is immense because you're the one making the decision. This is your career that it impacts. It's your face that people are going to point to if it doesn't work out. And I think that can be scary to some people, but get your reps in before you're actually in the position to own the decision. Get your practice in. No different than you practice football, basketball, or tennis to get better at it. Practice decision making to get better at it as well.
Avery has a question. Avery, what is your question?
My question is, what is one piece of advice that you wish you received earlier in your career?
Probably the networking thing. I wasn't shy, but I also wasn't one to get in people's way. Like, hey, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna bust my ass, and like the rest is gonna take care of the rest. And nobody ever said, "Hey, go talk to so and so, or go talk to this person." And so I had to learn that. And actually, I had a mentor do that for me when I got to the NCAA. A guy by the name of Kelly said, "Hey, here's a list of 15 people in the organization at NCAA. I want you to reach out to these people and set up a meeting." And at the time, I'm like, "I'm an intern. Why am I emailing the vice president for championships? Like, they don't want to talk to me." He said, "No, do it." And what I didn't know is he'd already paved the way and told those individuals I'd be reaching out, but he wanted to make sure I was the one doing it. And I reached out to all of them and set a 15-minute meeting that usually turned into an hour where they take me out to lunch or whatever it may be. And I started to end every meeting with, who else in the NCAA should I reach out to? And so that 15 turned into me almost sitting down with every single person at the national offices and starting a relationship. So then I'd see them in the hallways, or I'd see them at lunch, or I'd see them wherever it may be. And I was able to build some of those into much deeper relationships. And those are people I mean, the president of the Broncos right now was the head of football and baseball at the NCAA when I was there. He was one of those meetings I had, and one of those individuals that I worked with while I was there at the NCAA offices. But that relationship that started with the lunch is now carried on to where I can text him right now. I feel like I've got a colleague that I can pick his brain. But that didn't happen if I keep my mouth shut and just put my head down and do hard work. So I know there's a saying, closed mouths don't get fed. I think there's a lot of reality to that. You got to speak up. You got to be visible. You got to tell people what you want or what you're trying to do, because otherwise they can't read your mind and reach out and help you.
Austin has a question. Austin, what's your question?
So with collegiate sports seeing like major changes in NIL and the transfer portal, how are you guys like navigating the landscape shifts and ensuring that you guys remain competitive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the topic of the day every day, right now with all the changes. But I think I try to look at every change and try to find the opportunity within the change, right? And I think for a place like Toledo, that is in a major metro city that has a rabid fan base and we've got better attendance than most of our colleagues in our conference, I think actually the changes help us. I think we can be a transfer destination. I think there's things we can do creatively via NIL that our peers in college towns can execute on. I think from a revenue standpoint, we generate more revenue than others. So I try to look at it as an advantage and milk that advantage. And honestly, if I was somewhere else in the conference that didn't have the background of Toledo, I'd still look at it that way because you can't look at it otherwise, right? If you look at it as, oh my God, throw your hands up in there, this is the worst thing ever. That's not moving the organization forward. I think it's my job and the leader's job to remain positive, set a positive tone regarding the changes, and find a way to execute on those. But I think you got to one, control what you can control. Two, do what's unique to you to leverage your unique value proposition. And then I think three, you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan, execute the plan, but continue to revisit the plan to make sure it's the right plan, right? So we've got our strategic plan and our core that mission, vision, value, strategies. A lot of that won't ever change because that's baked into who we are and what we need to do. But there's are some when you really start tactics and strategies. There's going to be some things that we need to do differently given the legislation that changes. I mean, I fully expect this spring for the NCAA to allow us to be more involved in NIL. Well, we don't have a department set up right now to operate in that space. Do we need to add new staff? If we ever pay student athletes, who's running the payroll for the student athletes and being the HR liaison specific to student athletes and the like. So we want to bake a strategy that keeps us tied to our mission and our vision over the top, but also we need to revisit those strategies at least on what I would say would be a yearly or semi-annual basis to make sure we still can remain relevant and competitive in the changing landscape.
Diego has a question. Diego?
Yeah, my question is, what piece of advice would you give to those who are just not wanting to start networking, but struggle to communicate, but they are eager to network and build connections and relationships with other people?
Yeah, I think one, if you got individuals that can help set up the first couple meetings or lean on them, I think you got a professor there that can help or others around. I think sometimes that can soften the introduction and give you a warm introduction versus just out of the blue. I'd also say it's take the chance and just go. Send that email, that blind email, and see what happens. I mean, the worst thing they can do is say, no, I don't have time for you. Okay, on to the next. Or they just don't respond. Cool. Follow up once or twice and try to see, bring it to their attention. If not, on to the next. There's a lot of people in this industry you can learn from. There's a lot of contacts. There's a lot of organizations, athletic departments, leagues, whatever it may be, of people who will be willing to reach out to you. I mean, I still remember coming up and I'd reach out to a lot of people. It wouldn't get an answer at all. And I've tried to not be that individual ever in my career. I tried to always answer the emails. I tried to always say yes if I can speak to an individual or a class because I remember how dejected I was for the people that didn't respond to me when I did it. And I get it can be a hard, daunting task, but I always approach it like, what's the worst that could happen, right? That person says no, or that person's not friendly when you talk to them. Okay, cool. Move on to the next when the time being. But what's the best case scenario? You open up some relationships that can help set your course for your future that allow you to do things you never even thought were possible. So I get it can be hard, and I get certainly sitting down and talking to somebody via Zoom, phone call, whatever, is a lot harder than sending a LinkedIn invite or just sending the email and writing and copying and pasting the message. But I think you got to get out of that comfort zone and you got to find time and ways to get in front of people, communicate who you are and what you're trying to do and how they can help. But that's hard to come eventually outside of face-to-face interaction, screen-to-screen interaction of some sort.
Maddie has a question. Maddie?
In your work experience, have you endured a significant success or failure that allowed you to learn an important lesson or like something you didn't know before?
Yeah, probably way more failures than success. I guess I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about successes or those type of things. I think successes are a byproduct of the people you have around you. Failures are solely on me, and I need to handle them as such. So I own any failures that I've had. I think when you're a young AD stepping into a role, there's probably some things I did the first 6 months that if I had to do them all over again, I probably would have communicated them differently. I'll give you one example. So we go through a process. I walk into our basketball arena and we've got these banners hanging up, and they're like double decker, right? There's a banner up top, there's a banner below it hanging from it because there are teams that won a lot, and instead of consolidating them all on smaller number of banners, they just kept bringing new banners in. It just I thought it looked tacky. I didn't think it looked the way that the arena looks from a polish standpoint or really high level. And so told my staff, I said, hey, let's come up with a plan to change all the banners, consolidate them into half as many as are up there and put them on one side, do a really clean look that looks like it's sharp and it looks high level, like you see in some other places. And I got some pushback on that because people didn't understand, well, why are you taking down banners? Are you trying to say our wins don't matter? How did you communicate with the coaches on that? How did you communicate with the alumni whose names may be tied to them and others? And early on, I'm like, no, I see that there's a problem here. I see that it doesn't look and feel like the standard and portray the way we see ourselves, and it needs to change. That thought or vision has never changed or wavered on since I've been here. But the way to go about it and implement the change, I would do over because in my mind it was something silly like banners. It wasn't even a big deal. But I think, especially when you're early on as a leader, every move you make, people are watching and trying to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and probably reading into it way more than you intend them to. But you're brand new leader, so they don't even know what you're like. So you don't have that trust yet. You don't have that relationship yet to do those kind of things. So I think when you're new, you don't need to not change anything, but you need to be really methodical on what you do change and how you change and prioritize it. Right? Were the banners the biggest deal I was dealing with in the first 4 months of being here? Absolutely not. I just thought it was small. It was an easy win. It was a way to change things. Looking back on it, and then eventually we didn't change them until year two. And I'm looking at them right now. They look amazing the way they are. So my thought was correct. Like they could look way better and be done way better and enhance the look and feel of our arena. But the way I went about it, I'd probably recalculate. And I think that's a failure that I own is being a brand new AD and just probably being focused on some things, but also, hey, shut up. Lights cut off. Shiny, saving power around here. Shiny object. It's the clips, right? Shiny object that I need to take care of. So I think when you do make those mistakes, the thing you learn from them is just step up, rip the band-aid off and say, hey, my bad. That was me. Won't happen again and learn from it. Don't try to push it on somebody else or say, oh, well, that was the staff. They didn't do it right. Or somebody else didn't communicate it down the line, right? No, that's on you as a leader. Own it, eat it, and run with it and get better the next time.
Fantastic. One of our star liberos is here, Kayla. She will actually rotate in and ask a question now.
What strategies do you use to set your athletic department and athletic teams apart from other D1 institutions?
Yeah, appreciate it, Caitlin. I think you want to lean into what makes you unique. I think there's a lot of copycats in college athletics, right? Like you see something, whether it be a graphic on social media, or something else out there, and it's like copying and paste. You do whatever somebody else did because they had success with it. There's not enough individuality in college athletics, I don't believe. And I think those who dare to be different can carve out a path of their own that can be pretty special. And that doesn't mean you need to reinvent everything, right? Like popcorn's popcorn at a game. We're going to play sports, and they're going to be that. And we're going to take care of our student athletes. Graduation and class is important. But I also think there's an opportunity to zig when others zag and or just champion who you are. So we got a cornerback that will be drafted in the first round this year, Quinyon Mitchell. He was kind of the face of the draft as the draft went along because he's coming from Toledo, but he's the best corner in the draft. He had the best times or second best times in the draft and overall best performance in the NFL draft. So every article that pops up is Quinyon as the face of it. Quinyon's incredibly shy, won't talk very much. He's from Florida, just loves keeping a low profile and being around. But we want to help tell his story, to help tell the department story. So we strategized about that this morning, but we're going to lean in to Toledo's history as a manufacturing hub. Toledo has this nickname as the Glass City because all the major glass corporations in the country, or the vast majority of them, were based out of Toledo, Ohio. And so how do we lean into that Glass City approach? And then this idea that this young man's breaking the glass ceiling for a small school to have that first round draft pick. But really talk about our history, talk about our lineage, lean into the manufacturing, blue collar, gritty nature of Toledo and not try to be something that we're not. I think there's a lot to that. And that's the conversation we had this morning of from a branding standpoint, how do we leverage what's unique to this city and unique to this community, rather than just looking at another graphic out there and making it pretty with colors and calling it good. And so that's a small example, but I think doing as much as you can to lean into what makes you special, that's how you get a competitive advantage, right? Like competitive advantage to me is something that others can't replicate easily, that sets you apart, that allows you to get a gap on them. And that may mean saying no to some things, right? Like if it's a competitive advantage in recruiting, you may have to say no to some young people because they don't fit exactly what you want, even though they're great athletes. But if you're focused on what makes you special and different, then you'll attract the right people to, again, take that advantage.
Jocelyn, what's your question?
What qualities do you feel would make someone successful, while working in the sports industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think you all should take some time if you haven't already to think about, okay, what are your core values? I think core values are critically important, and then you always want to revisit and refine those to make sure they're everlasting, right? And mine are family, passion, integrity, curiosity, servanthood. And it took me some time to figure out, okay, what those are, what order, and what makes sense for me. And then we did that exercise for our department. And it's resiliency, integrity, servanthood, and excellence. And so we hire people to that, but I also hire people that mirror some of my core values to make sure we're aligned on who we are and what's important to us. So I think that self awareness to know who you are, what your strengths are, also know what your weaknesses are, is critically important. Not only in how you carry yourself and how you operate, but also who you hire and who you put around you. To certainly shore up your deficiencies, is really important. I think work ethic is non-negotiable. Probably more in college athletics than any other industry because we work insane amount of hours and we work together a lot. So you better be hard working if you want to work in here. I think humility slash servanthood is important. We strive to not only serve our student athletes, but serve each other and make others better at what they do and allow them to chase their dreams. And I think if you don't enter it for those reasons, I think your career is going to face some headwinds down the line. I always look for intelligence. I think that's one of those things you can't teach. To be smart and have the intelligence, you match that some curiosity in terms of somebody that wants to grow and be better, and then you put that together with hard work. That's a really compelling blueprint for success. If you got a hard worker that's really, really smart, but also is willing to grow and curious enough to know they don't have all the answers, that's a dangerous combination. And so finding those individuals, when you do, you want to hold on to them.
So Brian, our next one is from a student who's visiting from Japan, Toko.
Okay.
Toko, what's your question?
What are your beliefs about your work?
What are your beliefs about your work?
What do I like least?
What are your beliefs about your
Oh.
work?
I think I tell people all the time, like we're not curing cancer in college athletics, and so don't take yourself too seriously. At the same time, some of the student athletes that we have within our department may one day find the cure to cancer, and I think that's the benefit of working in higher education. Our young people are going to go on to change the world. It's our job to give them every opportunity to be the best version of themselves. And I believe college athletics has a transformative power, not only for the student athletes, but for a university and the impact it can have on the campus and the community which within they reside in. Athletics brings people together from all different backgrounds to cheer on a common cause. It instills civic pride to the community that you're in. Or, hey, my community did that. My local college did that, or they represented us. Or those student athletes on the team are from the same high school as I was. They represent us. And so I think it's that ability for college athletics and athletics in general to transform everything that it touches, along with working with young people in the context of higher education and seeing them for the 4 or 5 years they're here really transform. And go from that shy freshman that didn't know anybody to a senior that's ready to take on the world. That's really cool.
Well, Brian, we have somebody with an incurable issue. They are from Ohio and want to return. They don't just love the Pacific Northwest. That'd be Malachi. What's your question, Malachi?
Yeah, so with everything that you've done with schooling and the job positions, how do you have a technique to avoid burnout?
Probably not. Maybe I should have. I think probably the biggest thing is I love what I do. Now that doesn't mean it's not hard. Like I tell you right now, I had slept in like 4 days right now. So we got a coaching search going on. I am absolutely exhausted. And we're supposed to go on vacation this week, and I'm looking forward to that more probably than any vacation in my history because I've been driving back and forth to Cleveland the last 3 days, an hour and a half in the morning, afternoon. And I'm flat out worn out if I'm being honest with you. But I wouldn't call it burnout. I'm exhausted, but I'm not burnt out for the job because I love the job so much, and I'm really competitive and hungry to try to achieve and do more and more all the time. I think one of the things I noticed early on is you find something you're really passionate about. And there's lots of things in college athletics, but there's lots of things outside of college athletics. But find whatever you do, find something you're passionate about. Because when you're passionate about it, you got a chance to be the best in the world at it. And I think for me to wake up every day and strive to be the best in the world at whatever I'm doing, is always going to be the goal. And I think when you've got that, you're fueled by that dream, by that ambition. That'll push you past exhaustion and all the other things. Try to be better. I mean, I went to the women's championship game last night and watched Don Staley and Caitlin Clark, and see how Caitlin Clark has transformed women's basketball over the course of really the last 2 years. But then also watch Don Staley go from an elite player to go to South Carolina, where she built it from the ground up and be on that stage and go undefeated for the season. Like, I left there energized and excited because she set a dream that everybody told her was impossible. You can't build a great women's basketball program in South Carolina. You can't do this. You won't be able to accomplish this. And all she's done is create a program that I think has lost one game in the last 2 years. And to come out on top there and change the game and be on the Aflac commercials and all, it's so inspiring because everybody told her what she couldn't do. And all she did is put in the work and do the hard things it takes to get there. And I think if you can't watch that and say, okay, what am I doing along my journey? What are my dreams? What are the things that people tell me I can't accomplish? And go out and do that. It's hard to get burnt out doing that, I think. It may lead to exhaustion. I think it's really hard to get burnt out that way. But I try to, I think since I've had a family and kids now, weaving my kids into what I do. You can't take yourself too seriously when you got two knuckleheads running around, I promise you. They keep it light and they add good context to what's important in life. I think sometimes you can take yourself too seriously, but being around them, being able to give them a hug at a basketball game or see them run around, or just talking to my wife. She was a pediatric ER nurse. And so when I say I come home and say, oh man, I had a bad day, then she tell me about her day, it really put it into context of really what a bad day looks like. Of seeing a young person come in that's been burned in a fire, abused by their parents, or those kind of things. My bad day is the game got rained out, or we didn't win a ball game, right? And I think keeping everything you do in context, but also finding something you can be passionate and ambitious about. And I can think that creates a healthy balance.
So Dragon has a question. Dragon.
So now that you're in a leadership position, I imagine you're kind of inundated with a lot of ideas from the outside. How much of what you do is balancing your own ideas and changes you want to make with the ideas of others?
Yeah, I'm very collaborative in terms of my thought processes and anything that we do as a department. I try to invite a lot of people to the conversation, and or when I do have an idea, I test it out on a lot of people to say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think we should do here? How you feeling about what we're about to do? And ultimately, as a leader, I have to make the decision. I have to make the hard decisions and own them. But I like to get varied viewpoints. I mean, Frank, I'm not even close to being the smartest person in the room. And I realize that about myself, going back to self-awareness. But I think if we've got a lot of really good people around the table giving their input and their thoughts on things, it more than often than not leads to a really good outcome. That diversity of thought will help you lead to the diverse outcome. So I think a common mistake of a lot of leaders is having too much of an ego or thinking they've got all the right answers, which most of us don't. And I think once you realize that about yourself, you'll be way smarter and ahead of the game. But I think, too, staying up to date on the latest trends and things happening, not only college athletics, but business, entertainment, all these other fields is something I pride myself on. I pride myself on knowing what's happening not only in college athletics, but what's happening from a fan experience standpoint in baseball, minor league baseball, hockey, whatever it may be, film and arts, what's happening with the cable industry right now and how that may lead to the future. I think the more you can stay well read on those things and continue to think and refine your thoughts, in addition to owning what you need to do from a decision making standpoint, you're going to be better off.
Ethan has a question.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned that when you go to conferences, you want to ask important questions that don't make it seem like you just want the job. Could you give us an example of one of those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's contextual, and I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not saying ask a question to make it seem like you don't want the job. I'm saying your full intent should be not to approach people to get a job in the first interaction, but really to build a relationship And if that relationship leads to a job opportunity down the line, that's great. But they'll see through if you're trying to mask that. But I think ask questions that express a general curiosity. If somebody's presenting on how to generate increased ticket sales to your volleyball program, asking a question about some of the specifics they've done, or maybe something that your institution's facing, or something you saw everywhere else, and just not being superficial with it. Not, hey, tell me your journey, like everybody asks that, but ask a question about something they're expert in, or something that gets them excited that you're generally curious about. But I think you've got to take some time to reflect on what they're talking about or what their expertise is, and or dig into their background. Right? If I'm on stage and you find out I played at Wofford, and you say, "Hey, well, tell me about your experience at Wofford," because I had a cousin that went to Carolina Panthers training camp, and I know they practice at Wofford. It seems like a great place. Like, that's more likely to spark a conversation than tell me about yourself or give me general life advice. You want to ask probing questions that show some genuine curiosity, but also make you memorable. Right? Don't ask the standard, "Hey, Google, give me the top 10 questions to ask somebody." Like, show some depth and some thought that you put in, some thinking in before you ask the question, and you got a genuine curiosity. I think that's really important.
Marcel, what's your question?
How do you bounce back from ideas that like might not have worked, and how do you continue to improve when things are going right?
Yeah, so I think on the back end of the question, you always want to recap what went right, what went wrong in every decision or thing that you do, and do that debrief as a team. Hey, no matter if it was a success or a failure, like, hey, what went right here, what went wrong here, what can we get better at? And that's, if you win a championship or you lose every game, you want to go through that thought process. I think that's really important. I think in terms of balancing back, I mean, you got to have some resiliency, and I think as a leader, you got to empower your team to make mistakes. Like, if you operate an organization or business or a department, and everybody has to be perfect all the time, I think it's gonna be really hard to get good ideas out of that group, because they're gonna be so afraid to fail. They're not gonna want to try new things or exciting things. They're gonna play it safe. And if you play it safe, it's gonna be really hard to make progress. And there's times that things are not worth the risk that you would take to execute on, but there's also a time and a place for people to be creative and think outside the box. And so I think you got to give people the wiggle room to fail, but also learn from those failures and not make the same mistakes twice.
Aiden, you got a question?
With all these coaches like leaving their schools to be coaches for other schools, how do you prioritize either keeping them at your school or finding new coaches to replace them?
Yeah, I think you got to do both. I think you want to try to retain talent as much as you can, but there's also a reality that no job is permanent for anybody, quite frankly. And so you want to keep them for as long as you can, but at the same time, you got to get really good at identifying talent. I think hiring coaches is probably the most important thing we do, not because of just the wins and losses, but those coaches dictate the student athlete experience. I don't sit in a young person's home and recruit them and talk to their mom, their aunt, their grandma. Our coaches do that, and I don't spend hours upon hours or hours with them on the bus on road trips or like. Our coaches do that. And so my most important job is to make sure I put them around individuals that I know are going to be great leaders, be great mentors, and give them a chance to be successful in all facets of life. And so when you have that opportunity to hire a coach, I don't think there's any greater responsibility that you'll have right then. But certainly if you can retain, it's always cheaper to retain than it is to go out and look for new. So you want to do that to keep continuity, and from a student athlete standpoint, so they don't have to continually have a revolving door of relationships, because I think that can damage trust.
Brady, what's your question?
Any advice on how to keep your priorities straight when your plate's so full?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point I talked about a little bit about forming a plan, and then continuing to revisit that plan and say, hey, is what I'm working on in alignment to what I said was important when the bullets weren't flying? And what I mean by that is, when things get crazy, hectic, or whatever, you get easily distracted by a lot of things going on. But if you've written out what your priorities are, written out a plan for what those priorities should be, constantly take a second or in the morning or whatever, maybe once a week, to revisit. I mean, these are the 5 priorities I've laid out for the department. Is this what I'm devoting most of my time to? And if not, I need to check myself and recalibrate or rethink how I'm delegating some of those activities. So I really think it's important, before the things start changing around you, to have that conversation with yourself and really write those down, and then constantly revisit them and say, okay, either I need to stick to these or I need to make changes to them because I've got other priorities that I didn't acknowledge at the time.
Brian, one of the questions I've got is, who do you find that, can allow you to have events and they'll keep it in the vault? But also, who are the people that will also allow you to be checked? I.e., they're people that you not only trust, but maybe they can also push back a little bit to ensure that you're making the right decision, not just a decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think you look all around, but I think when you come up with the organization and you're kind of at the top of the org chart, it's really hard to get people to be honest with you, just because you're the boss. And I think no matter what it is, they're going to try to couch it a way that kind of guards against um, running completely opposite of you. And I think to a certain degree, I've done the same thing throughout time. But you got to give people one the freedom to be honest with you and show, hey, I'm not going to bite your head off just because you say you don't like the idea that I had. I mean, there's a tactful way to say it and time to say it in place. But I think that's part of it. And I think too, I mean, having those people in your circle. I talk about networking for knowledge. It's really building relationships with those individuals where you can call them up and say, hey, Troy, you're an expert in ticket sales. I want to ask your advice on how I'm doing this. Am I thinking about this right? Or I just look at my wife, and she has no problem being 100% honest with me and checking me when my ego gets too big. But everybody's going to have different people that matter in those contexts, but you definitely want to find those people who can be 100% honest with you.
So one of the harder things that you have is when you're hiring for new talent, how do you make sure that you're hiring for the person that you actually see rather than the person that you actually get? Because sometimes in the interview room, they're a lot different than when you get them on site.
Yeah, everybody can be an actor for an hour and put on their best face. And then person you get into work, you're like, holy cow, who is this person in the process? So I think I try to chop it up into three buckets and descend in the order of importance. And I learned this from my boss, Joe Cargard at Rice. One, what have you done? Right? Like if I'm looking at a coach, are they office coordinator, defense coordinator, recruit, whatever it is, did you make the offense better? Did you make the defense better? Did you recruit high caliber athletes? Did you win a whole bunch and you were the head coach? Whatever it is, who are you on paper? What impact tangibly can I see that you had on the organization? Second, and slightly less important, is what do people say about you? And that's not calling your references on your reference list. That's again because you network for knowledge, because you built a broad network around the country. You can call people that individuals work with and say, "Hey, tell me about so and so. When they get a flat tire into work, who are they? When they spill coffee on the shirt on the way into the office, how do they treat people? Who are they on the good day, bad day, indifferent? Who are they when they get there, they fail? Who are they when they had success? You really want to dig deep on that part because again, people can be anybody they want to in front of an interview for an hour or two or a day or whatever it may be. But who are you on a day to day basis? How you treat people is incredibly important, and what impact do you have? And then least important, but still important to the discussion is who are you on the interview, right? You want to work that interview to the point where you understand I can work with this person. I can see myself with this person. This person can clearly communicate their value. They can clearly communicate their ideas or in these leadership positions. I can see them in front of that podium for the press release. Or I can see them in front of a arena coaching a game, or I can see them in the locker room with our student athletes leading them in that space. And that's not how they appear necessarily. It's how they carry themselves. They have the confidence, they have the communication skills to clearly articulate what's important and really build some alignment or unify groups. I think that's really important. But I look at them in that order. Most important, what have you done? Second, what do people say about you? Least important, but still important is what you do in the interview. And I think if you develop a profile before you actually talk to individuals, always taking the individuals that you're talking to and matching them to the profile. I'm no different than I talked about the priorities. You want to map out what's important to you before you get into the interview process, because what you have in the interview process, you get a lot of people calling you, advocating for people. You get agents blowing your phone up, they get your number and say, "Hey, I got the next best. I got the next best Phil Jackson here, and you got to interview him. He's the dynamite." But you got to say, okay, does that match what I outlined and said I needed on the front end? And if it doesn't, you got to pass up on it. And I think sometimes those are hard decisions, but necessary decisions.
I always find it interesting, especially when hiring for basketball coaches. They all seem to know everybody's job and who's going for what and everything. Do people really realize how interconnected this business is in terms of not only college, but also pro? And then if you do something egregious, even if only a few people see it, everybody kind of knows about it?
I don't know that everybody does when you're interested in entering the industry, but I certainly think there's a reality that there's a thin degree of separation between everybody in college athletics, and so that works two ways, right? When you do something really really good and you're a really good worker, the world knows pretty quickly. That allows you to rise fast through the industry. If you do something wrong or you had a bad incident and the like, It's really hard to escape that because it's not something you're gonna keep in the wraps. Everybody's gonna know about it pretty soon. So I just think you have to know that about the industry and navigate it appropriately.
So with a lot of our undergraduates, I always put them in the position of saying internships. Internships. Isn't that a good way to kind of show whether they can work in different organizations?
It is. I just think getting experience however you can get it. If it's an internship, GA opportunity, if it's you find some hands-on examples, you can do a micro internship, you can job shadow. I just think finding a way to get your hands and get inside an athletic department and then look around and say, okay, is this what I like? Sometimes it's more important to eliminate what you don't want to do than it is to decide what you do want to do. But you got to get inside organizations to start figuring that out. And again, going around and asking other people questions about what they do and say, hey, maybe I like that more. Maybe I like this more. Or maybe I like where I'm at. But the industry's gotten so competitive nowadays. If you don't have a start or internship or some experience on your resume, it's going to be really hard for you to crack in later in life.
You moved from different athletic departments, some with a lot of funding, some with as much funding as they need, and then some with not any funding. Is that good to kind of see those perspectives to be able to work in different environments?
Yeah, I think it was for me, and it was intentional. I worked at the SEC institution. I was just making the joke the other day, like when I was at South Carolina, on our staff director, we had two pilots that flew the athletic department plane. I can tell you, we don't have any pilots on the staff director here at Toledo, um, and so it's just a little bit different. But I'd honestly say my department at Toledo is probably 7 times the size of the department from a revenue standpoint than my department at Wofford was where I played football, right? So I've seen it at the FCS, I've seen it at the group of fives, so you call it. I've seen it at Power Five, I've seen it at SEC, I've seen it at Pac-12. I think that perspective on all those different areas is help. I also think it's perspective on how different parts of the country react to what you're trying to do. I think living in the Pacific Northwest versus living in the Midwest versus living in the South and in Texas, I just think you learn a lot from being in those different areas and conferences that kind of help you move on down the line. I also think it's healthy for your career because nobody can ever say, well, Brian can only work in the South or Brian can only work in the Pacific Northwest or Brian can only work in Texas because, quite frankly, I've lived all over. So that shouldn't be a restrictive note on my resume in terms of where I can work or what I can do. And I think the broader your network, the more people you have to call on to ask for help and ask for knowledge and do those things we talked about earlier. So I think there's definitely an advantage to get out of your comfort zone and moving somewhere you never lived before. And candidly, do it while you're young. I think the advantage I have of being able to get to this point early in my career is even the fact that my kids are relatively young, right? Like when I moved across the country, it wasn't my daughter's in high school and she's got to leave all her friends to move across the country. My daughter was 3, right? So she didn't know too much of a difference between where we were at and where we were going. And so you have enhanced some flexibility younger in life before you kind of settle down and get into a pattern. So even if you love where you're from or love where you're at, go out and experience something different, even if it's just for a summer, because you can always come back, generally speaking. But you want to go out and experience the world and get outside your comfort zone. I know you mentioned we had a young lady from Japan in there. I lived in Tokyo for 6 months during law school. I want to study abroad because as a football player, I never got to do study abroad. So in law school, I said, hey, I want to do study abroad. I'm going to live in Tokyo. And I was completely outside my comfort zone. I grew up in a really small town. So the idea of me on the subway is terrifying to try to navigate my way. But it made me uncomfortable, but it made me better. It made me understand how different people in different parts of the world operate. And so I just implore you to get uncomfortable as much as possible because there's no growth in comfort. You can't grow when you're comfortable. You've got to get uncomfortable, whether it's job responsibilities, where you live, who you're doing it with. Make yourself uncomfortable, and that'll speed up your growth.
Well, fantastic stuff, Brian. Thank you very much for coming up. We appreciate your time.
Thank y'all. Have a great day. If I can ever be of help, please say the word.